The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
Now, let us take a brief look at very recent trade statistics for Georgia. In January-April 2022, the external merchandise trade was around 33% higher to the same period of 2021. The exports grew by almost 33%, while the imports grew by around 34%. The share of the negative trade balance in external trade turnover stood at almost 40%. In January-April 2022, the share of the top 10 trading partners by exports in the total exports of Georgia amounted to around 77%. The top partners were China, Azerbaijan and Russia. In the same period, the share of the top 10 trading partners by imports in the total imports of Georgia amounted to 66%. The top partners were Turkey, Russia and China. At the same time, the share of the top 10 trading partners in the total external trade turnover of Georgia amounted to around 68%. The top trading partners were Turkey, China and Russia. Copper ores and concentrates reclaimed the first place in the list of top export items, equaling almost 23% of total exports. The share of ferroalloys in the total exports amounted to around 12%. The motor cars exports occupied the third place, constituting around 8% of the total exports. The top import commodities in January-April 2022 were petroleum and petroleum oils, constituting around 9% of the total imports. Motor cars followed in the list with almost 9% of imports, and the copper ores and concentrates were third in the top import commodity list with around 7% of imports. And one more very significant statistic I want to share with you today is the indicators of the labor force. In the first quarter of 2022, the unemployment rate in Georgia decreased by 2.5 percentage points compared to the corresponding period of the previous year and equaled 19.4%. The labor force participation rate, that's the share of the labor force in total population aged 15 and older, increased by 1.6 percentage points compared to the corresponding period of the previous year and became 49.9%, while the employment rate increased by 2.5 percentage points and amounted to 40.2%. The labor force participation rate in urban settlements increased by 0.8 percentage points and by 2.7 percentage points in rural settlements compared to the previous year. The employment rate in urban settlements as well as in rural areas increased by 2.2 and 2.9 percentage points, respectively. In the first quarter of 2022, the share of hired employees among employed persons was 68.1%, which is 1.2 percentage points lower compared to the corresponding period of the previous year. At the same time, the unemployment rate in urban settlements decreased by 3.1 percentage points compared to the corresponding period of the previous year, while in rural settlements it decreased by 1.5 percentage points. Traditionally, the unemployment rate is higher for men than for women. In the first quarter of 2022, compared to the corresponding period of the previous year, this indicator decreased for women by 2.2 percentage points, while it decreased by 2.7 percentage points for men. The labor force participation rate is higher for men than for women. In the first quarter of 2022, the indicator for women was 39.1% and for men 62.5%. The labor force participation rate for women increased by 0.9 percentage points, while for men it increased by 2.5 percentage points compared to the corresponding period of the previous year. In the first quarter of 2022, the employment rate for women as well as for men increased by 1.6 and 3.6 percentage points, respectively, compared to the corresponding period of the previous year. The only way to ensure stable and inclusive employment is to have a strong private sector. Let us have a brief overview of the business week in the scope of the checkpoints.
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.